residential tech talk, lighting specialist, arc residential tech.
Welcome to Residential Tech Talks. I'm Jeremy Glowacki, Executive Editor of Residential Tech Today. On this week's podcast, James Garrett joins us from Battleground, Washington, where he is CEO of Garrett Integrated Systems. Our guest today recently acquired the 10-person Boise, Idaho-based custom integration firm, The Loop Technologies, from former RTT podcast guest Eric Crawford. The buyout was an exit strategy for Crawford so he can focus on his component company, IFP Connect, which is a single-gang transceiver solution for connecting fiber optic cable in the home. The acquisition marks the first step in James Garrett's quest to build a regional custom installation company in the Pacific Northwest. I'm always up for an interesting CI business acquisition or exit strategy story, so I'm pleased to welcome today's guest to discuss how it all came together and to learn more about his path into the industry. James Garrett, welcome to the podcast.
Good morning, Jeremy. Thank you for having me.
Well, you're welcome. First off, congratulations on the acquisition. I'm imagining things might be a little nuts for you right now.
Slightly hectic, but the dust is starting to settle finally.
That's great. I mean, we're recording this at the end of May. So when did you actually pull together? When was everything kind of complete on that acquisition?
Day one was February 1st.
Okay, so we've had a little bit of time for that dust to settle for sure.
Yeah.
I want to dive into the deal and talk about your plans for your kind of Pacific Northwest expansion. But first, I'd really want to help the audience just get to know you a little bit first. You had a background in Iowa. I see you've worked your way through custom integration as one does before they own their own company. But I was amused that as part of your background in Iowa, you worked for electrical sort of components in grain silos. That's like about the most Iowa sounding tech job I could imagine.
It was very Iowa sounding. Yeah, I did industrial electrical work for a few years in 2011, and we were automating grain silos. So we were working with 480 volts and automating those systems for grain conveyor belts, grain elevators. So it was a very fun experience. And on the top of the grain silos, the best thing you could see was all the cornfields. So some things I don't miss about Iowa, I should say.
Well, it's kind of a beautiful image, but I can see where working in beautiful homes might be something else, entirely. And
cornfields get old after about 20 years.
Yeah. Well, how did you get into the custom integration business in the first place? It seems like the grain silo work maybe was a stop off along the way, that you were doing integration before that, right?
Yeah, it was a pit stop along the way. I actually got into the electrical industry right out of high school in 2004. I was wiring houses for about a year and a half with a local company in Ames, Iowa. And on one day I saw a guy running speaker wires in one of the nice houses that we were wiring. And I'm like, whoa, like you get paid to install speakers in houses? And I literally harassed him until he finally hired me. Mm-hmm. And so he had to get permission from the electrical company that I was working for because he wasn't poaching. But yeah, I harassed him and finally was able to join with him. It was Total Home Technologies out of Ames, Iowa. Super awesome owner, and worked with him from 2006 to 2010, 2011. So it was a wonderful experience, and I learned a lot of good stuff from working with Phil.
And then what brought up the move then away from Iowa to the area where you are now in Pacific Northwest?
I was actually born in the Dalles, so there's a long. I moved out to Iowa when I was about 3 years old with my mother. And then after my divorce in 2012, I decided to head back to home and, mountains and oceans and get away from the cornfields.
Great. And so you looked for available opportunities in that area, and you found you could get your way back into working in homes and away from grain silos?
Yeah, I got into the industrial. It was kind of like the tail end. The company slowed way down, sadly, and it was an hour commute for me to work in Ames to where I was living. So that's where I jumped into the industrial electrical for a short stint. Before when I moved back out here, yeah, I found a couple companies and ended up working for one out of Westland, Oregon.
And what were your kind of goalposts along the way that you felt like, maybe I can do this myself and kind of hang your own shingle to become a custom integration business owner?
I guess it would be, just working there. Obviously, working for someone else, you can always find things that you can do better, right? And for me, I get bored if something's too easy. So I have to have a challenge. And where I was working, it really wasn't challenging enough for me. And I felt that I could do something better. I could treat people better. I could, so if I was going to do something, I was going to do it better. And my focus was, if I created my company, I would focus on taking care of my team and treating them the way that I would want to be treated. Processes are very important as well.
And so you start off, you don't immediately name your company Garrett Integrated Systems. There's a funny little anecdote that I read in Jason Knott's article in CE Pro that I have to give him credit for getting you to tell him, and I want to repeat that if you don't mind. What was your original idea for the company name, and why didn't it work out?
The original company name was Wound for Sound, AV. And after the 10th person pronounced it wound for sound,
yeah,
I was like, okay, something's got to change. Because I didn't think about that. Which is very ironic because the industrial company that I worked for in Iowa was Haugan Electric, and the guy's name was spelled H-A-U, so people would always go Hagen. So it's funny how, tongue in cheek, I ended up doing something similar and going, oh wow, I got to change the name.
Right.
So we changed it from Wound for Sound. I shortened it up to WFS for a time being, and then did a complete, a rebranding, and going with Garrett Integrated Systems, and then focusing on my logo being a G and a power logo simultaneously.
Yeah, and so it sounds like you started off trying to do anything you could, mostly, but you're mounting TVs there in the beginning, before you started adding structured wiring, camera systems. How many months, years, whatever, did you kind of go where you're just sort of doing the basic stuff before you felt like you were kind of getting into more sophisticated integration?
Gosh, I would say it's all a blur. I mean, it's hard to think of the milestones because when you own your own thing, you work every day. Like there's never a day off, because you're always thinking. For me, I'm always thinking of how to be better, better than I was yesterday, and improving. So I guess to answer your question, I think it happened fairly quickly because I started off on Craigslist and then built up a name. And then as my name started building, then I started getting more referrals. And then, as it kept going, I realized that I was losing jobs because of my name, because people were like, well, you only do audio video. And it's like, oh, we do everything technology. And so, but yeah, it's ramped up. We still do a little bit of TV mounting, but that's more of it's involved in our larger projects that we're working on.
A lot of times that evolution occurs when vendors discover you and you've got maybe a pretty notable control system brand or, some kind of a cool speaker line that maybe you hadn't had access to. Was there anything along the way like that for you?
In the beginning, I worked with Universal Remote, and that was what I could get my hands on. No one else wanted to touch me. Crestron, they wanted this huge buy-in, even though I had people vouching for me, and I have a red truck with flames on it. I cannot afford to put $50,000 down for product. But yeah, I started off with URC, but as the brands kept growing that we've worked with, I have seen a lot more leads coming from them, but I never really got leads from the actual brands until the last year or so.
And are you still a URC dealer, or did you start doing other projects with different control systems?
My Battleground location, we focus mainly on Savant.
Okay, Savant.
Yeah, they're very innovative, and I'm very happy with them. They have their quirks just like all the others.
Yeah.
But yeah, Battleground, we focus on Savant, and in Boise, we now have access to Control 4. So I'm learning a lot about Control 4's capabilities as well.
Well, and then in 2019, you purchased a 4,000 square foot home on Main Street, and you have a 2,000 square foot shop, I guess, with that. So that must have been a pretty good sort of moment there for you to feel like you've got an established footprint locally where you're not just the truck with flames.
Truck slammer.
I wasn't going to say it, but yes, maybe.
I've been called that, and I think some people still call me that, and it's like, whatever. No, I did a strategic purchase in 2019. It's not on Main Street. It's in the middle of nowhere.
Okay.
A lot of people call it middle of nowhere. But I purchased a show home. I wanted to have a house that clients could come to and understand what we do. And so I have been still wiring and doing a bunch of stuff in the house, but there was literally the house was built by a remodeler and was not very techy. So there was a phone line in the shop and in the house. So there's nothing else. And so it was a blank slate for us, so to speak. But I think it's been well received with having a show home. It allows me to actually have more finances to pump into my team versus having a very expensive commercial location. But some vendors don't like you not having a commercial location.
But you're able to create a solution in that home, right? That looks like what you're able to do for clients, which seems to be like a really good opportunity for clients to visualize what you're talking about with them.
Correct. But yeah, no, I've got motorized mantle mounts. I've got landscape speakers. It's nice having a property because I can crank up really loud landscape speakers for clients, demoing it to them, and they can be really truly immersed in the sound and understand it versus wondering if I'm going to frustrate a neighbor in another building. It gives me a lot of opportunity to really walk people through a house and help them understand how to expect it in their own.
Well, we will continue our conversation with James Garrett after the break. Today's episode of Residential Tech Talks is brought to you by NICE, the global manufacturer of smart home security and building automation solutions. NICE is bringing together 30 years of innovation with award-winning products from ELAN, SpeakerCraft, and Panamax to create a holistic ecosystem for builders, integrators, and consumers. Learn more about how you can create one home with one solution at go.niceforyou.com/RTT. Welcome back. We're talking with James Garrett, CEO of Garrett Integrated Systems in Battleground, Washington. James, you were talking about your show home, and I think that that sounds really cool, but now you've actually have two facilities in two different cities because of your acquisition. And I've seen these types of deals succeed often, but also fail. And I'm curious to know what does and does not work. And you're in the early stages here, but I have the utmost respect for Eric Crawford, having learned about his focus on process and know his class at CEDIA was so popular and just a really thoughtful guy. And so his involvement in the story was even more intriguing for me. So can you talk about when you thought that you might want to expand and how you and Eric were able to connect initially?
Sure. I guess the idea was not mine. My father-in-law presented the idea to me because we're just talking. He's been there for me since the red pickup trucks with flames on it and guiding me along the way and with a lot of really good advice. And he kind of was helping me to understand through different ways of growth. And, you know, an easy way, it's not easy in any way, shape, or form. One way of growth is through acquisitions. And he had specialized in them for a good part of his career. So my first acquisition was his 48th. So I learned a lot about acquisitions. He learned a lot about our industry. But he was the one that initially presented that idea to me a few years ago. And I've been pondering it and thinking about it. And more recently, back in August, September, we have vendors. Our vendors travel. They talk to other dealers. And I was talking to a couple of vendors I'm friends with, and I just started putting it out there. I'm like, hey, man, I want to grow, and I want to grow through acquisitions. So if you know anybody who's wanting to get out of the industry, send them my way, and we'll kind of go that way. And that's how I met Eric. It was through a mutual vendor that we used, and said many great things about Eric, and we started that process in I think November.
Oh, that came around pretty quickly then.
Yeah.
So I think one of the challenges, and I don't want to put you on the spot in terms of talking finances or anything like that, but I talked, informally to people in this industry about what their exit strategy is and how difficult that can be when they're trying to just retire, not even go into a manufacturing operation. And so you obviously had to be able to provide some money in the deal. And you're a fairly small company. Is there any insight you can provide there and how that works and what it takes to be able to acquire a company and give enough to someone who doesn't necessarily want to retire on the amount of money, but he needs to be able to sort of transition into his manufacturing operation? What can you share about that part of it in terms of how you do that from being a small company and acquiring another company?
Got you. Well, I've always been very bad about paying myself. I've always put a lot of money back into my company because that's how you can sustain growth. It's wondering when you're truly ready financially. You just have to have someone who's really good with finances, aka my father-in-law, to help me see where I'm at and if we're at a good point and understand the cost. Like the cost to do an acquisition is a lot. Because he's family, I'm going to take him on a vacation. That's my goal, to repay him for his services, if that makes sense. But it is a very expensive undertaking, so to speak, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So you had money in the bank essentially to make the purchase, but then you didn't have to pay that business advisor necessarily because it's your father-in-law who you're going to take on vacation.
Perks of the relation. One of the many, many perks of the relationship.
That's right. And now your new location, the Loop, is 6.5 hours away by car.
Yes.
And
if
so
it's about 8.
But okay. And so one of the keys was that what Eric told you, and I remember in the article about his ability to step away from the company, and leave it leave others in charge essentially, and not feel like he is there all day long, 24/7. So can you share that detail and how that helped to deal with the distance?
There's a lot of processes in play. There was understanding that he only spent about 10 hours a week involved in it, so he had structured it so he could step away and work on IFP, which was very smart because in doing acquisitions for myself, I don't want to buy someone's job.
Yeah. That's a great way to put it. Yeah, that's an excellent way to put it.
I already have a job. I don't want another one.
Yeah.
So he had put in a lot of processes, and even he did a very good job with that. But once you go from one location to 2, there's a lot of issues that you don't realize until you're in the thick of it, and then you realize what ones are truly important that will then exponentially affect if you go to 3 locations or 4 locations. So there's a lot more planning that goes in.
Yeah. So you've got 2 independent operations, and even though he created it to be fairly self-sustaining or self-regulating, as I think you put in the article, is there a point then you feel like you need to standardize at your one company, and you're going to be obviously creating the branding for both to be the same, but in terms of the way it operates behind the scenes, there's something that changes there, I'm sure, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's how granular do you want to go? Because
Right. Well, yeah, I
it's
mean, accounting, I would imagine accounting kind of has to get kind of
counting
standardized.
intercompany communications, they're ordering. Like I order from one location, then other locations getting invoiced. It's like is
Mm.
those things that you don't think about with one location because it's always going to one. But if you have the same name with multiple locations, it's the like as I said, how granular you want to go. That was one that
So
I
many
noticed
things.
the other day.
You had all that in mind when you went into it. It wasn't a shock.
No, it was not a shock. And with that acquisition, I was that very first week that I was there, I actually interviewed my now GM.
Hmm.
Super amazing guy. I'm so happy that he's on my team because he was working in California and living in Idaho, and he would travel back and forth, and he was living what I was hoping not to do, and I
Hmm.
was able to get him in as a GM and have him be home with his family. Family is really important for me, and so I was happy that I was able to help give him some peace as well while bringing him on as a GM.
Yeah, how did you connect with him? That's an amazing find and something that so many companies are struggling with right now, just finding those quality people.
I would say chance, putting out in the universe what you want, not what you don't want.
Hmm.
And he had actually originally went messaged Eric
Hmm.
initially, and then Eric set up the interview. And then when I walked out and said, "Hi, I'm James, the new owner," he was like, "Wait, what's going on?" Because he didn't even know. He thought he was meeting Eric. It was quite hilarious.
Okay. Well, that's great that you're on the same page there and you've got somebody in place so quickly. Because you did initially need to kind of do a part-time move there, right? While you got settled in with the new company.
Yeah, the first month, I rented a house there for the first month, and then flew back on the weekends to spend time with my family.
Yeah, and so as you kind of get things rolling here with the two and you've got it moving along, you're going to eventually switch names from the Loop to your Garrett brand name. But are you feeling confident that you still want to expand, that this is a good plan for you? Are you good with two locations? You want to keep going?
If honestly, if I stayed with two locations in probably a year and a half to two, I'd probably get bored. Um,
Okay.
it's how I've learned my brain works. It is a good challenge. It's fun, but uh, I was given a vision that I'm supposed to be a very good leader, right? And so it's not all on me. I have an amazing team that backs me up every day, and to be able to help them to grow in their career and personally is an amazing thing to be a part of. Giving people opportunities that weren't given opportunities in other companies that they worked for. So I'm not trying to go on a tangent, but I will be going and pursuing more locations. Uh, the question is, when will the next one be ready, and when will I be ready? Is more of where it's at.
Yeah, and how do you gauge how many is a good number for you? I mean, is it just every 2 years and you get bored, you want another one? Do you have a limit there? In the article, I think you said something about 7 over the next 10 years. Is that
Yeah,
target based
I
on
was trying to have
something?
a conservative number,
Hmm.
in the next 10 years to do, like you said, another six acquisitions for a total of seven. Um, so that's a conservative number. So it might be a year or two, but as I get better with understanding the process of the acquisitions and the transition, it will be a more sped up process because I'll have a lot of the minute details of invoicing handled correctly, so I don't get random invoices from different vendors to different locations.
Yeah, and so I noticed you've now as a larger company and actually probably acquiring a company that had already been a member of ProSource. You're now part of ProSource. You went to your first ProSource summit this past spring.
Yeah.
Um, what was that like for you to get to know some new people, some fellow business owners, and share some insights there with them.
The acquisition was amazing. It gave me so many opportunities that I didn't even know were there. I got the opportunity of joining a CDA group and have been introduced to some amazing people. ProSource, now going to ProSource was super fun. I actually met with my CDA group for, I think, a day or two before the event, just going over everything. It was awesome. Sherry from ProSource said that I had the most interesting story of how I got into ProSource, because I wouldn't take no for an answer. I found a way to get in, and that was through an acquisition.
That is a good way. That's very unique.
That's hilarious. She's like, you're the only person that's gone to that extreme length. I'm like, you know what? Don't tell me no.
And you're also, now, were you a member of HTA prior to the acquisition, or did that come with the acquisition?
No, we're an HTA luxury member beforehand.
Okay.
During the acquisition, Eric was actually applying for becoming an HTA member, and he used me, I think, as a reference because Josh asked me about it, and I'm like, I can't tell you why, but yes, they should be an HTA member.
Isn't that funny?
Yeah.
Probably one of the things that he didn't have on you yet in terms of his process, like, figured out. Like, that's pretty impressive that you could help him kind of in your helping yourself at the same time.
Oh yeah, it was funny. I mean, because like you have to sign NDAs because it's if it falls through, you can't talk about anything. I mean, because you're privy to information that no one else has. But yeah, so that's why I was like, I can't tell you why, but yeah, he should be a luxury member.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, we had Josh on recently talking about HTA, and I respect what he's attempting to do there. It's definitely a grassroots effort, and I think it's really important for the industry to have some kind of level of quality, badge of quality for their companies. So congrats on that, and for both of them. And kind of as we wrap up, I mentioned to you before we started recording that I always like to ask integrators how they manage their mental health, their physical health, because this industry can eat you up. And one of the things that jumped out at me as we were starting to set up this interview was you had some times blocked off and said, that's when I have lunch with my wife. It seemed very important to you for a good reason, obviously. How do you do that? What do you do to keep yourself sane and not stressed out with hobbies, family time, that sort of thing?
I listen to my father-in-law. He's very important. He and his wife have been married 46 years. And he has traveled all over the world for work. So I listen to his marriage advice, his parenting advice, his financial advice, because they're very, very important. And he has helped me to understand, you need to have time for that, for family. Personal, I used to work out every day before I'd go out in the field and pull wire and do all the work. Now I'm doing office work, and I wake up really early in the morning and do office work. I have a home gym in my house, so I've got it to the point where I have to walk past my exercise equipment and feel guilty if I don't use it. So it's enough motivation to remind me to exercise. So yeah, I don't do it as nearly as much as I should. I still work way too much, but it's to be expected in our industry. I'm just finding new ways of scheduling time, like you saw, for family, lunch, picking up my kids. That's important, being there for family.
And have you figured out a way to support that you mentioned on your website 24/7 support, which sounds good in theory. It sounds good to the client, but for you, that means someone's got to be on call 24/7. Have you figured out a way to accommodate that without it being intrusive in your personal life?
Yeah. A few years ago, I made a hefty investment into service because I wanted dinner back with my family. I wanted time to myself on the weekends. In our industry, we are on call, and it's inherited that we're supposed to provide service for free. Clients get it in their heads. but yeah, I invested heavily into service, and to see the efficiency that I've gotten within the company, with my techs not getting bombarded with phone calls and emails all day long, they're actually able to work. Same thing with my programmers. It was a worthwhile investment. So I'm able to, I'm still on call sometimes, but at least I can put my work phone away and know that I've got, support in our company that will field the phone calls and the emails and get people taken care of and forward it on to us after hours if necessary.
So when you say you invested in it, is that human capital, just having more people available to share those shifts?
We actually partnered with, it was One Vision. It is now ProVision, I believe. They've successfully rebranded. So we have partnered with them. So
Okay.
they are our basic line of support. I'm pretty sure you're familiar with
Oh, yeah.
Joseph.
No, that's a great move for
Yeah.
sure.
I found out about Joseph when I was redoing my website with One Firefly. So it just happened by chance.
Yeah, that's a great move. And I don't ever want to lead the witness and say that's who they're using or working with or one of those companies, but I hope that that's the answer, because that's the smart way to do
Like
it.
I said, man, it's like it's expensive, but the
Yeah.
piece that comes with it is worth it for me, for having more family time.
Well, for sure. Well, as a last kind of comment, anyone that's considering something similar to what you're doing, I know you mentioned in the article having an executive assistant helps you manage paperwork and all of that, with the transfer of assets and vendor agreements. What do you, is that the basic advice? What do you want to say to your peers that maybe are considering this or are a little
They're
overwhelmed by
considering
that?
doing an acquisition themselves.
Yeah.
There's a lot of homework to do. I mean, there's a lot between you have to know finances, to know numbers, to know what you're looking at for another company. That's just the point of, doing an acquisition. The fact that we closed on my first acquisition was a feat in itself, because I can't remember the exact numbers, but like my father-in-law said, just so you know, like half of these fall through. Like you don't even get to the acquisition. So just making it to the finish line is a race of itself. So once you get to and actually having an acquisition, I would say, yeah, having an executive assistant would be very important to handle the transition of vehicle titles, utility bills, everything. But it also depends on the type of purchase that you do as well.
And having a father-in-law like yours would help as well.
It was extremely helpful. I owe him a lot of yard work and, like I said, a vacation.
I'm sure he's going to hold you to that. That's great, though. Congratulations on it all, James. And thanks for taking the time out today of sharing some real personal stuff here. Whenever there's a business deal, it's kind of hard to talk about because you can't give away everything. But I hope it continues to go well for you and you have a great summer and future business expansion as well.
Awesome. I really appreciate you having me on.
James Garrett is CEO of Garrett Integrated Systems in Battleground, Washington. He recently acquired the Loop Technologies in Boise, Idaho. You can learn more about his 2 locations at garrettsystems.net or theloopboise.com. And that wraps up today's show, which was produced by Residential Tech Today, IPW, and Pretty Easy Podcasts. Please check out prettyeasypodcast.com if you want professional and affordable production help on your own podcast. If you're new to Residential Tech Talks, please subscribe to our weekly podcast wherever you watch or listen to this episode. Also, check out all the latest residential tech news at our magazine's website, restechtoday.com, where you can also subscribe to the print or digital magazine and to our Tuesday and Friday email newsletters. Until next time, please stay safe, stay inspired, and let us know if you have a great story to tell.
Residential Tech Talk, lighting specialist to Residential Tech Talk.
Home automation, smart device, home or smart house.